expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to the President's Day edition of Washington Unplugged. I'm Bill Plante. A war of words broke out yesterday between former Vice President Dick Cheney and current Vice President Joe Biden over the state of the nation's security. It was the closest thing we've seen to a high-level debate on the security issue between this administration and its predecessor. The two Veeps argued differences over the handling of terror suspects, like the Christmas Day bomber, over interrogation techniques, and over which administration should get credit for winding down the war in Iraq. So, who won the debate? And is the Obama administration less tough on enemy combatants than the Bush administration? Joining me today to discuss all of this are Politico's Carol E. Lee and John Bellinger, a senior fellow on the Council on Foreign Relations. Carol, let's start with you. The White House is taking what Vice President Cheney said pretty seriously. They rolled out Joe Biden very quickly in response. What do you make of their response?
Well, I think what you've seen is Vice President Cheney for the past year has been the loudest critic. He gets the most attention. He really gets under their skin. He can frame the debate. He can change the debate. He can dictate what people are talking about when he says something, and he's been very critical of President Obama. And so what they wanted to do once they got word that Cheney was going to appear on ABC, they decided that they were going to get Biden back-to-back, both preemptively and then afterwards. So they set up so that Vice President Biden would tape an interview with Meet the Press the day before on Saturday. That excerpts or a transcript of that would come out just before Cheney went on the air. So that put Cheney on the defensive more, so where he had to answer things that Biden was saying, and he didn't just get out there and have his own platform. And then what you saw afterwards was they arranged so that as soon as Cheney finished, almost immediately, Biden was informed of what he said, and he was responding almost in a rapid response campaign style to what Vice President Cheney was saying. So it was really an interesting debate.
Well, who do you think came out on top?
Well, they both think each other came out on top, right? I think the White House is saying that it really showed the differences between the policies of the Bush administration and the policies of the Obama administration. What I thought was interesting was that there was almost a role reversal there, where you had Vice President Biden on CBS saying, you know, we did the same thing as George Bush, which is something that you wouldn't have really heard them touting during the campaign.
Well, John Bellinger, are President Obama and his administration now taking credit for some of the policies in Iraq that were implemented by the Bush administration?
Well, I think some of the political name-calling is unfortunate. I guess it's to be expected now in Washington. You know, the ironic thing, I was in the White House from 2001 to 2005 before I moved over to the State Department. And you know, in the aftermath of 9/11, it was the Democrats who were attacking the Bush administration for not having done enough to prevent 9/11. And a lot of the 9/11 Commission was really putting the Bush administration on trial, saying you hadn't been tough enough, which I have to say was, to a certain extent, I think what led to some of the excesses in the Bush administration was a need to feel that they were doing absolutely everything that they could. Now it's a bit ironic to see, because of this pressure that's being put on the Obama administration, and I think they really did not completely have their eyes on the ball, the terrorism ball, for the first year, but they've really gotten focused on it now. And now, of course, they're talking about war all the time, and yes, we really are in a war, and we understand all of this. So it would be interesting, of course, now going into an election year, if they feel that they really have to torque up the counterterrorism rhetoric.
Well, this is a bit of a sideline, but both of you can weigh in on this briefly if you want. Remember that in arguing about who gets credit for Iraq and the withdrawal, that Senators Biden and Obama voted against the buildup in 2007.
Right. That's one of the things that you heard Vice President Cheney say yesterday, was that if they are going to take credit, they need to give a healthy dose of thank you to George Bush up front. And then you heard Biden say he'd be happy to thank George Bush. But then what the White House is arguing is that, yes, this was a plan that was put into place under President Bush, but that they've seen it through and that they've done a really good job at that. And so they think that this is actually going to be one of their strong points going into the November elections, because they're going to have what Vice President Biden says is 90,000 troops, American troops, leaving Iraq at that time. And so they're certainly going to put this in their column.
Well, John Bellinger, getting to some of the substance of the criticisms, you have written that the Obama administration has been less observant of international law in matters dealing with these terrorist suspects than the Bush administration. And you say that we shouldn't expect much shift in that policy. Why?
Well, I think there was a flurry of executive orders early on, a year ago now, with the closure of Guantanamo and the review of the detention policies and so forth, and I supported those. I think those were some things I had worked hard to get done in the Bush administration, and I supported Obama doing them. Since that initial flurry, though, he really hasn't done much more. In fact, if anything, he has kept many of the Bush administration policies, including many that are very controversial in Europe, such as rendition and military commissions and indefinite detention without trial. In my op-ed in the Times today, I was really talking more about things that Europeans and others expected on the International Criminal Court, compliance with the rulings of the International Court of Justice, which actually the Bush administration had worked quite hard on in the second term, but really didn't get much noticed. And I think what will happen is, particularly in an election year, the Obama administration is going to have a hard time really trying to push too hard on some of these international law and international institutions issues that are just not popular at home in the United States.
Do you think they've gotten a pass so far?
I think they have, and it takes a while. The old adage takes a while to turn the great aircraft carrier of the ship of state. But they're coasting a little bit on some of the rhetoric early in the administration about being committed to international law. One of the things I had talked about was a world court order to review the death sentences of a number of Mexican nationals on death row all across the United States. The Bush administration had actually worked, surprisingly, very hard to comply with the world court ruling. We got very little credit for that. The Obama administration actually hasn't done anything on that yet.
Carol, it's pretty hard, isn't it, to separate the politics from all this? I mean, here you have John Brennan, the president's counterterrorism advisor, saying that, well, the claim that only 20% of the Guantanamo detainees have gone back to fighting, that's good.
Right.
I mean, you can't move the politics out of this in an election year, can you?
You can, and you see that in reports today that Attorney General Eric Holder is getting a political minder. I mean, these issues have a political angle to them, and I think it's interesting that what you've seen in terms of lately is that what the White House would say is that they've been tougher on terrorism and on killed more terrorists than under the Bush administration, and that they've been doing that all year, but they're not the kind that's chest bumping and going to go out and talk about this really openly. But now you're starting to see where we're getting into an election year and things are heating up and they might be taking some heat, and you're seeing leaks and stories like the AP had a story the other day really detailed about sort of what they're doing with drones and how they're going about these different operations. And that is clearly to try and frame the political debate that they don't want to lose here. And I think it was interesting what John was saying is that if they step into this debate, their liberal supporters are going to certainly take a much more closer look at what policies they are keeping in place, and that's also a risk for them too.
Well, the closing Guantanamo and having civilian trials.
Sure.
John, do you think that either one of these things is ever going to happen?
It's going to be a long time for Guantanamo to close. I personally would like to see it closed, but it's definitely not going to happen this year in an election year. It's not going to happen in 2012 in an election year, so the narrow window is 2011. I actually would not bet much money that it'll happen in 2011. We've got Democrats in Congress who are voting against the president's signature foreign policy initiative, and it's just not very popular back home. Federal trials, I would like to see the federal trials of the 9/11 bombers and I think planners. And I think that could happen. It's not going to happen in New York, clearly. And I think the search is on right now for sort of a jury-rigged system where there could be a federal trial, but on a secure military base somewhere for those 9/11 planners, while at the same time using the military commissions for some of the smaller fry that have committed clear law of war violations.
Carol, was the administration naive in thinking that they could accomplish all of this, all of these foreign policy, terrorism-related things?
I think there was a bit of the administration being naive, and I think that and now they came in and you know, you hear this all the time, that they came in and they saw what it was really like and had information that you don't have as a candidate and realized how tough it was going to be. And the political winds changed so fast as well. And so that also was a factor in that. I thought that, you know, if Guantanamo Bay does not close in the next couple of years, that's going to be a real problem for President Obama. And you heard Vice President Cheney yesterday saying that he didn't believe that he would not be surprised if it was still open when the president leaves office, because it's in his argument view that there's a reason why it's there, and that he thinks it's not something that's going to actually be able to be closed in the next year or two.
Well, I guess we'll have to leave it there for today. But Carol Lee of Politico, John Bellinger, Counsel on Foreign Relations, thank you both very much for being with us.
Anytime.
And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged today. Join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm Bill Plante. Have a great holiday.
If we don't expand our imagination,
Justification for being worthless.